sick of Destiny.
Yeah, that's a running theme.
Yeah.
I was really, really excited for Destiny,
Me too.
and then they pushed it back, and it kind of killed my excitement a little bit. And then the beta came out, and I was super excited about the beta. Played the beta. The beta was fun. And then they opened the beta. The last day they opened it to everybody, or the second. There was 3 days. Second day they opened it to everybody, which pissed me off because I'd like to think of myself as being among the few that got to play the beta, and then that didn't turn out that way. And then they pushed the release date back. And then when it came out, it was just like, all right, I finished the gameplay. I finished the storyline in, what was it, Dennis? Like 3 days?
You could do it in about 8 hours if you were really bored.
Yeah.
And then the DLC didn't come out for another 6 months. And unlike Dennis, I don't like to grind. That's why I don't play RPG games. I can't grind just to get more shit.
I did love Dragon Age Inquisition, though. Really no grinding required.
Everyone keeps telling me about that game. I need to buy that game so bad.
I hate grinding too, but it's a pretty great system.
Yeah, is it more in line to the original Dragon Age than the 2 or the second one?
I never played 1 or 2, but I know enough people who have, so I would say it is closer to the first one.
Good.
To me, it was like kind of like, I don't know, Knights of the Old Republic. It's been so long since I played that game, but I think it felt like that game.
I think I played Knights of the Old Republic. That was the MMO that came out a couple years ago. Right?
Not that one, but the one I'm talking about is the original one for the Xbox.
Oh, one of the good ones.
Yeah. MMOs I don't really mess with. I'm not gonna pay a subscription fee for a game like that. I just don't play them enough.
Yeah, I played the free demo for the MMO, and it was horrible. It was a mixture of horrible because my laptop that I was playing on sucked, and the gameplay itself kind of sucked. So I didn't even bother.
Yeah, MMOs too much of a time sink.
Craig, are we recording?
Oh yeah, dude. Haven't you noticed? Look at your right hand corner. So.
Well, I see the live, but I didn't know if we were recording it or not. So to go ahead and start the show, I guess we have a special guest for our most favored listener, Hank.
Hi, Hank.
We have the host of the Higherside Chat, Greg Carlwood, on tonight to talk about podcasting and making podcasting your business, and then what other random shit we come up with. So, Greg, thanks very much for coming on.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thanks for having me.
First, I guess I should explain. We have a mutual listener. His name is Hank, and through Hank, I was introduced to your show.
Right on.
So as we're going along with our show, I wanted to start breaking off because we've interviewed mostly authors, director. I guess you could say we've had an actress on, then just like a couple everyday average Joes. But I wanted to break off and do some discussions with content creators as well. And since we have a mutual fan, I said, well, why not be the first one, be something special for Hank? Because I know you quit your day job to basically focus on your podcasting and your T-shirt company.
Yes.
Going up to that point, what brought you to podcasting?
Well, man, I knew I didn't want the 9-to-5 passionless job, which is where I was. Just something to pay the bills that I hated. I felt like I was basically doing 8 hours a day in prison and just getting to come home to a house. But I knew I wanted to do something creative. I wanted to do stand-up. But, I kind of think podcasting is stand-up comedy 2.0. There's really no point and going out there and driving down to the Comedy Store, waiting in line all night to go on for 3 minutes to have no one in the room remember your name, when you can just spend all that time learning how to make a website and getting that going and putting up content on your own website in front of an infinite audience, the internet. And I think it's just a better plan for someone starting today. I love comics, but if you didn't start in like the mid-90s and work your way up to now, I think to start now is kind of a waste of time.
Yeah, you have a flooded marketplace as far as stand-up comedy goes. And it kind of, there's the drawback of the podcasting world, too, because every single stand-up comedy, or every single stand-up comedian has a podcast.
That is true, yeah. And that is kind of the bitch of it, because when I first started, I was like, okay, it's going to be a comedy podcast. And I'd have local comics on. I met Joey Diaz in the green room of the Madhouse Comedy Club, and that was ridiculous. I had some fun with it, but one day I did mushrooms and went to the Comedy Store condo with a couple of local guys and Ari Shafir, and I guess I had what you would call a bad trip, and now I'd say it was the greatest pivotal moment of my life. But that's when I was like, dude, stop trying to do this comedy thing, because it may be something you love, but it's overblown. You're not going to compete with a lot of these other podcasts. So I was like, what's my other love? Conspiracy. And I was like, you know what? There isn't even a conspiracy show that I even think is doing it right. So maybe I should try that instead. And I got to give credit to the mushroom. I think that's kind of what pushed me in that direction. But you're right. If you're trying to do a comedy podcast, it is a tough road to hoe indeed.
I actually had a very brief conversation with a podcast over Twitter that they followed us, so I followed them. I looked in their podcast. They talk about soccer mostly, and as much as I like soccer, I can't listen to a podcast about it.
Right.
But the guy was saying, he was talking about pod fade, and I didn't know there was an entire language for podcasting now. I didn't know there were such descriptive words for podcasters like yeah. And I asked, I was like, what the fuck's pod fade? And he was like, that moment where you tell yourself it's time to get a new hobby. And I was like, because he's talking about, it felt like he hit a brick wall. He doesn't want to do it anymore. It's like, I get really frustrated sometimes, but I don't ever want to quit.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on what your goal is for it. I feel like I've gotten to talk to people around the world that I hold in such high regard. As a conspiracy fan, there's all these speakers and researchers that I always thought were super interesting that I'd listen to. I get to talk to all of them, and that is pretty damn awesome, even if I wasn't making money. But now, to have it be my career is putting out 5 shows a month and selling some T-shirts, going to the post office once a week, it isn't too bad.
Now, see, and I want to steal your secrets. That's the meat of what I'd like to get to, because you are a dedicated content creator. You create a podcast. There's 5 episodes. Technically, you could say you do 10 episodes because you have the plus side, where you get an extra hour for being on the plus side, and then you have your T-shirts. So how did you get to the point where your podcast was making you money without sponsors? Without sponsors.
Well, it was making me some serious donation money before I ever made any real changes, and that might be because I'm in the conspiracy wheelhouse. People in that world tend to want to support good content or a good delivery system for conspiracy content because there really aren't any. And then you get into the whole, most of the media and big corporations are owned by the same people that want to keep this stuff under wraps. And I think all those things combined make the conspiracy community more willing to support a show. But there were times where I got $1,000 donation. And I actually got $1,000 donation from the same guy like month after month. And I was just like, wow, like, holy shit, you know, I don't know that that would ever happen if it was a comedy show, regardless of how popular it was. Because there's a sense of you're putting out information that wouldn't otherwise be there. I want to support that and facilitate that. So that was in my favor. But then I started doing the money bomb, which is where I was getting all that donation money, and I would take half of it and I would give it back to a random listener. And that started to get pretty crazy because I was giving out over $500 to people, and then I started to split it, and I would give it out to 2 people. And so some months I was giving out, $400 to 2 people, and that was kind of cool because it's like people winning their own mini little lottery. And I got to have them on and talk about what they were going to use the money for. And I don't know, I think that was also great because the conspiracy community had a lot of hosts like Alex Jones, who is screaming from the rafters like the world's about to fall apart, and he doesn't do anything to help people. Here I am, some idiot stoner working at GameStop, and I'm giving away $400 to people, and this guy's got this huge network. So by comparison to other people in the conspiracy community, that worked in my favor also. And those were really the first 2 steps. And as far as advertisers are concerned, my thought there was, look, if this ad space is worth something, I should use it. Why give it to someone else? Because obviously a person wouldn't use the ad space unless it was profitable. So, you know, who's better suited to pitch to my audience than me? So I started making a clothing company called Conspiratees, all conspiracy-related things, so I already know where the audience is, and that's been pretty successful. But eventually I knew that wasn't really going to be enough, and I had to support myself on the show, and now the T-shirts are kind of, they're still there, but it's definitely the show that is what I'm best at and what is doing the best for me.
How long was it before you had feedback from your listeners? Like this episode is the episode that throws us into our 3rd year of podcasting.
Damn, congratulations.
Technically, it's episode 10.
Oh. Where's
What?
part of your prop?
What are you talking about? Technically, it's episode 10.
It's episode 10 because we changed it yet again. That's what.
Remember when we rebranded?
Let's talk about that. That is a classic problem, my friend.
We've actually rebranded 3 times.
Yeah, that's a big problem. I never changed the name of my show. I did change the direction that it went, but it was the Higherside Chats all along. And the way I look at it is, you're not looking for perfection, you're looking for progress, and that's all you need to do. And so the people that you had will stick around, probably. I'm sure a lot of the people who were there for the Joey Diaz and the Ari Shaffir show were not going to stick around for Michael Tessarion and Professor Griff, but, you know, some of them did. And you're just looking for progress. You'll get a few more people all the time, and some people will listen to anything. So, you know, keep them around. When you change your name, though, then they have to go subscribe to something else, and people are also lazy. So don't make them do that.
The thing is, we changed our RSS feed. We didn't change the content of the show, but we did change the name.
Yeah.
That's all.
We stayed. We've had the same RSS feed and the same websites. We did change our web page, our away from the because we use Podbean as our hoster. So we've changed our actual website when we decided to rebrand to the Oatmeal Raisin Conspiracy.
But the old website still links to it.
But our old website links to the new website. So all we did was change in name, and it was really the first time we changed. We started out just Dennis and I, and it was 2 ranting idiots. Dennis and I were gonna, talk about theism and politics, and we were gonna rant about current events and whatever came to mind and pissed us off. That was going to be our podcast. But we noticed when we didn't rant and we weren't angry, more people listened to us, so we kind of backed off and we started doing more nerdy stuff. And then we added Craig, and with 3 people, you can't be the 2 ranting idiots with 3 people. So we went to the ranting idiots, and then after, what was it, almost 2 years of that, we decided it's time. Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla and SpaceX, I'm sure you're familiar with him. He posted a tweet talking about how uh, oatmeal raisin cookies look too much like chocolate chip cookies, and there's some sort of conspiracy there. So in an episode about absolutely nothing, well, no, it was an episode about hashtag bombing.
No, that was what I was doing during the episode.
Yeah, the episode was about nothing. He was just
we were talking about hashtag bombing. We decided to change the name to the Oatmeal Raisin Conspiracy because we got, the Ranting Idiots was great. It was a great name, but we wanted to rename ourselves to something that shined a light a little bit more on where we were going. Like
right on.
We don't want to be too serious about anything. What?
You were trying to get hashtag moist anus trending.
Yes, I was.
About.
And I got hashtag moist anus trending for about 5 minutes.
And then you almost cried when I replied Elon Musk with hashtag moist anus.
Because I'm trying to get him on the show eventually. But so you, yeah, there's a very short list of people who I want on the show that I could die that night and die happy because I got to talk to them. And there's a very, very short list of those people. And I know probably 99% of them wouldn't even give a second glance to my invitation. So you had a pretty good community or follower response early on, because we've practically begged people to talk to us and they won't do it.
I don't know. Looking back, maybe it wasn't all that early on, but it was when the show became consistent. That was a pretty pivotal moment, because for a long time I'm working at GameStop. I'm putting up shows when I can. Maybe it's 2 weeks go by, maybe a month went by at times. I'm sure there were times where I was like, I don't even know if I'll do another one, and then I'd get a response back from someone I wanted to talk to, and I was like, okay, cool. But when it became consistent, when I was doing a show every 5 days, that was what my first schedule that I stuck to was. That's when it really started to snowball, I would say. But I get a ton of feedback from YouTube that isn't constructive, but usually it's emails. Now that I have the Plus site, that the comment section in the Plus site is pretty strong, and that's usually where I hang out. It gets more than the free, I guess, just because people are paying and subscribing. They feel a little more vested in it, so they maybe want more of a conversation, which is cool. It's also a kind of a closed system, so not anyone can just start commenting, which also is kind of helpful for an actual conversation with your listeners. Yeah, maybe it did take a little while, but again, the conspiracy world, people want to talk. People want to give feedback to the host. So maybe, I don't know, maybe the issue is that you aren't in like a wheelhouse of sorts yet. I mean, if you're going into nerd stuff, like maybe double down on that and then get part of that community, and then they'll start giving you the feedback,
That I kind of made the executive decision to focus on authors, mostly just because that's who I talk to on Twitter.
And by executive decision, he means browbeat. So.
But then here we are, not an author.
This is true, and I'm the most proactive when it comes to asking for people to come on the show. Mostly just because I have nothing better to do than bug people all day when I'm at work. I work in a factory, so I have a lot of downtime. Uh,
I just realized the irony of all that, Travis, right? The fact that you really don't like talking to people, you're the most talkative in the group. That's just the irony of that's just astounding me. It just dawned on me. How the fuck did that happen?
how does that work? Whereas I'm the one that hates everybody, and yet I'm the one making the invites,
I don't know, dude.
and practically begging people to come on the show, which will lead me to another question in a moment. I think this is probably the most interviewee that this show has ever been. Because we don't do. That's one of the first things I tell people when I invite them to come on the shows. We don't do traditional interviews. Like your show feels like a traditional interview show because you're good at the traditional interview.
Mm-hmm.
You have questions and those questions build upon other questions.
Mm-hmm.
We're not good at the interview. I think between the three of us, we're just far too spastic-minded.
I'd say we're more of a coffee house chat. We sit around, we just start talking, things come up, we talk about things, what's going on,
Yeah.
llamas and dresses, whatever comes to mind.
Especially with Dennis, because Dennis hears a word and he'll run on that single word.
I can't help myself. My nature.
Well, but we've had mostly authors on, and I was hoping that we would get like a more literary following, and then still have our nerds and still have our old, because we still have some hangers on from the theological discussions, the political discussions,
Mm-hmm.
but probably not very many. I think that's where Hank came in. But Hank is the only person who's ever talked to us, so we don't know if we're doing anything right. So we're just kind of continuing to do the same thing. We put a show out every Tuesday. We've expanded to YouTube. We finally built our website. There's just and we've pretty much stopped asking for people to contact us and tell us what they think, just because it's obviously not working. But
Lost your train of thought.
I did, because I had a question that was, how do you get your guests? Because that being mostly my job, I find it difficult to face the rejection or just blatant silence sometimes every day. How do you convince your guests to come on if they need to have any convincing?
Well, it's obviously easier now. When you have a successful show, it obviously gets easier and easier, especially when you get a name in the conspiracy community for doing good interviews. People are like, oh, I've got information to present. Where do I go? Where are the shows? I could go on Alex Jones where he talks over me every 2 seconds and we cut for a commercial break. Or I could go on the Higherside Chats where I get asked really thoughtful questions by a well-prepared host, and he sets me up to present my information in the best way to a captivated audience. So I let the guests know. Early on, I would say, hey, there is more in this for you than you might think. I am not Coast to Coast, which has millions of listeners, but how many of those Coast to Coast listeners are just truck drivers driving through the night, people randomly tuning their radios into whatever's on? They're not engaged. When someone listens to you on my show, they pressed play and they're there to hear it from the beginning. They're not just coming in at the middle. They're not leaving for the ad breaks. I'm not going to cut you off and play something during the middle of your great point about Cialis. So I told them all this, and I would be like, hey, I'm going to make this worth your while, because everybody's time is valuable, and you really should look at how the partnership is playing out between you and your guests, because you want people to come on your show so that their followers come and listen to you, so that you get a little runoff from their popularity, or if you're interviewing an author, their audience, their fans. So what are they getting out of it? Because sometimes I listen to interviews because I have to prepare for a show I'm going to do, and I'll listen to a 3-hour show that almost got nothing said. And you got to respect people's time. They might only have a 30-minute commute, and they're going to play you once, and if you don't strike them as interesting in the first 20 seconds, well, they'll never pick up your show again. They'll see the name, and they'll pass it by. I don't think you get a lot of second chances, unless you change your name. But,
yeah, maybe that's...
I was just saying, in the
We need to
beginning, it
change our
was
name
about
every week.
letting them know that they were gonna have something that they could share with their listeners and be like, hey, here is me presented in a really great, thought-out way by a guy who actually read the book. That's important. So many shows aren't doing that, which I think is the fundamental basics of doing a show. Why your show and not one of the other 100,000? Because it's not just a crapshoot. Shows are successful because they do things well, and other ones spin their wheels because they're just not yet connecting with how to put their idea best out into practice. Sometimes you're just not lucky.
Yeah, I think it's a mixture of almost all of those things for us. It's I know we've had one guest on recently that I absolutely failed as the person who invited him on the show. I failed the purpose of bringing him on the show, and he was a tremendously patient person. It was one of my favorite authors, Mike Cole, and I brought him on the show because he had a book coming out 2 weeks after he would appear on the show, and we never talked about his new book.
Oh, see, that's a killer.
And that was completely my fault. And I thought about it afterwards. I was like, I don't think we talked at all about his new book. We started talking about his old books, and we talked about his career as a writer and his other jobs outside of writing, and then just completely lost the purpose of plugging his new book.
That's a shame.
Yeah, I thought, after I thought about it, I gave it a few days on Twitter before I went and bugged him again, and I told him, because he had a lot of podcasts lined up. I think ours was the second podcast he went on. So, like, it was that realization that, all right, he came on our show, he's scheduled with us second. We weren't the first show, and the first show was a much better known show that's specifically genre novels, and then the show after is the same. But he gave us that time, and I failed completely. So I went on and I said, I realize now I didn't talk to you at all about your book, and I would be more than excited if you would, and more than appreciative if you would give us a second chance to bring you back on and talk about your new book instead of just me stick my foot in my mouth for an hour and a half. To which he agreed, and he said he'd be more than happy to come back on. So hopefully I can make up for the failure. But I think for us, there is a mixture of, we're just not hitting the right chord. We're a little spastic for some people because we like to cover as many topics as possible, so we don't like to pigeonhole necessarily, which could be damaging.
I think it might be.
And then
We like talking for everybody on the show besides just ourselves.
nobody else is talking up, so
Travis, I was letting you finish your rant about how great you are.
there was nothing about how great I am. Everything in that rant was about how horrible I am.
You spent the entire episode talking about yourself and how you went with that project instead of talking about his new book. Kind of like what you're doing today.
Yeah, don't make the same mistakes twice. I don't know that you are, but like I said, you're always looking for progress, not necessarily perfection. But if you're making the same mistakes over and over and over again, you're wasting a lot of time, and you're giving a bad name to your own podcast. Because that author probably talks to a lot of other authors.
Most of them, I think, has been they've been because they have a lot of fun with us. So I think we save ourselves with the fact that we're rather enjoyable to talk to. I think at least that's the feedback we've gotten from our guests. Usually, so it's not. I don't think we're shooting ourselves in the foot with expanding our guest pool. I think we're just shooting ourselves in the foot with. Well, I'm not going to speak for Dennis and Craig. I'm shooting myself in the foot with foot in mouth itis a lot, and I've been working on it though. So I don't know if they can tell. I don't care if they can tell or not.
I
They
don't.
give me
I can't tell.
they'll give me shit either way.
Well, no, that's my job. Anyways, I did have a question since Travis has been talking forever. Now I can actually say something.
Cool.
How did taking that first step to saying, you know what, I'm not going to do my job anymore. I can actually. Was that just like one of the freakiest steps ever? I just kind of like, okay, I'm gonna go do this. This is it. I got it. And then like it's one of like trying to dip your foot in a pool type thing. It's like, yeah, no. But wait, did you stutter step or did you just say to hell with it and just dive right in?
You know, I definitely stuttered with quitting for a long time, and I was bold with the people I worked with. GameStop was the last place I worked. I was a store manager of a GameStop here in San Diego, and we'd go to the conference in Vegas, and which is like a little mini E3 that they throw, and we'd go out for drinks with all the other store managers. I'd be like, guys, if we are here next year, we all fucked up, and everybody would laugh. But everybody was talking about how miserable we are in the company. Everybody hates the company. They hate the job. And I was not kidding. I was dead serious. I'm like, if you are here in a year, you are the epitome of a failure because this is the worst thing in your life and you did nothing about it for a full year. I know it's tough. It's not easy. And that's just one example. But I used to talk so much shit about, oh, I'm going to quit. Oh, I'm going to quit. And I put it off for so long. And when I did finally quit, it was because I had slipped. I got promoted to a bigger store, so I had less time to be on my smartphone tweeting and doing all the things for my show on the clock. I had way less time. So my job really started to slip. And I had a good relationship with my boss, and it was slipping and slipping, and then he had me training this other manager, and I just called him one day. I said, hey, man, to be honest with you, I've got this show, and it's doing pretty good, and it's all about conspiracies, and I've been doing this on the side, and I just think that I'm done with GameStop, man. And he was like, done. So, like, you're not going to put in 2 weeks or anything? I was like, no, man, I've been thinking about it. I'm training Ben. Ben's going to need a store. Let him just move into my position, and I'll just wash my hands of the whole thing. Because I wasn't going to get fired, but my boss definitely knew that I did not care anymore. Like, he could totally see through the act that I was trying. And I just was like, yeah, man, I'm just done. I'll come in tomorrow and tell you about my show, though, because he was kind of interested. And I was like, yeah, I bash pretty much every corporation. I talk shit on capitalism. Nothing about this job fits with what I talk about on the air. So it was kind of shocking for him, but I'd say I left on good terms, and all of my people that I still hang out with are my old buddies from GameStop, and a lot of them still work there, still miserable 4 years later. And I don't know if anything's ever going to change, or if they're ever going to take the reins on their own life, or just stay on that hamster wheel. But yeah, I put it off for so long, finally pulled the trigger. It went okay for a while, but I had money saved up, and I was not making the cut every month. I was definitely going 400 into my savings, 500 into my savings. I'm like, okay, this is getting a little scary because I can't go back. Luckily, I also have a very supportive partner. My girlfriend is super awesome, and she had faith the full time, and she picked up the slack on a lot of my bills, and she was like, no, just keep going, just keep going. And then I finally came up with Plus. I mean, it's something that other shows have done, the idea of a bonus show. It's people kept saying to me, hey man, your interviews are so good, but they gotta be longer than an hour. An hour is just not enough. And I was like, but I can't do more than an hour because I'm trying to do all these other things. I'm trying to make sure I have a roof over my head. And then I was like, screw it. If they want a second hour, I can do it, but we're really going to have to make sure, like, if I have a steady stream of income and I decide this is my 8-hour-a-day job, I can do it. And I launched it in, I guess, August. I quit my job in February of last year, February 7th of last year, and I launched Plus in August. And it's been super successful and the best thing I ever did. And I mean, I'm not a rich man, but I'm definitely not worried, and that is what's awesome. I mean, I don't need much. I don't need much to get by. And just to not be worried is amazing on just a show. But yeah, it was hard to do, but once you pull the trigger, I think something happens. A lot of people talk about it. A lot of comics talk about this point of desperation where you need to make it. You put yourself in that position. You give yourself no other option. And like Terrence McKenna said, sometimes you hurl yourself in, or the trick to the universe is you hurl yourself into the abyss only to learn that it's a feather pillow. I think there's something to that. The universe appreciates boldness, and you should go for it.
I actually can agree with you on that one. I just completely changed careers and lifestyle in the past like 4 months. So I understand. It's not the I'm just gonna do internet because I'm such a Luddite. I have a hard enough time doing this and getting shit running. So
Well, even it's not going away. So learning it would be very advantageous.
Trust me. It's just if you would hear what goes on between Craig, Travis, and myself, and me trying to get things running and it's every week. It's horrible. That's why they don't let me touch anything.
You can learn.
I have my specific set of skills I'm good at, and I know what they are, so I use those to my best of my ability. But I do understand the idea of taking that bold step and going, you know what, this is it. I can't do this anymore, and I need to do something new with my life.
Yep.
And what I love about doing this podcast is that I enjoy being able to talk to people, finding out about like this, just being able to see how it worked, how they decided to do things, or why they're doing things, or just to get to know the person in general. It's always kind of nice. So, get a little background. That's always good.
Yeah.
So, even though I ramble on incessantly for no reason in particular.
Oh, I hear you. Me too.
Your Plus, is that an app you developed, or is that an app that you incorporated into your show?
It's actually not an app. It's actually the direction I went is I learned how to make websites. That's what I learned to do early on. It took a lot of work, but I'm like, if I'm going to have a show, the people are going to be presented with a website, and if it isn't good, they're not even going to listen to the show. So you got to learn how to make a good website. So I did that, and then when I wanted to do Plus, I just decided to make another website. So I have the HighersideChats.com and the HighersideChatsPlus.com. And if you're a Plus member, you go to the Plus site, and the show that you download is 2 hours instead of 1. So you log in, download the 2-hour show, boom. If you're a free listener, you just go to the HighersideChats.com. And it hasn't been very confusing for people. It seems to be a system that works out really well. It's better than trying to manage 2 different file types and 2 different RSS feeds on one website. This way, I'm an absent-minded stoner sometimes. This way I can make sure my feeds don't get crossed. They're 2 totally separate websites. And I don't have an app because there are enough podcasting apps in the world that all I had to do was find the ones that it works with on each type of device and list them for people. If you're on, Android, then you want to get X, Y, or Z. If you're on Apple, you want to get, A, B, or C. And if you're on Zune, you want to get this or that. I just list all that stuff for people, and then they have it.
People still have Zunes.
I actually know a couple people who are using the Zune to get their THC Plus.
One of the other podcasts that I listen to on a regular basis, the Crab Feast, they make a big deal about their Zune listeners because the Zune is something it was a flash in the pan that just came and went.
It was the Laserdisc of podcasting. The page.
You need to send him that tagline. Laser Disc of Podcasting. Zune.
Yes, it's still marketing the Zune.
What?
I said since they're still marketing the Zune, they'll need a new tagline, right?
Yep.
Well, they should. They should still market it. People are still using it.
Why?
Podcasts are still mentioning it.
You don't sell it anymore.
They should start making them.
Which is an
again.
integral part of why a business would promote something.
Exactly.
Key.
Microsoft is already doing a great job with their Xbox.
True that.
Do you use we use Podbean as a host site? Just because when we started the show, I wasn't familiar with hosting. Do you have your own server basically, or do you use a host site that you can upload your RSS feed to?
I use a host site. I use a shared server. I'm a little shocked sometimes about the difficulty that people say is involved. Like, for example, especially in the conspiracy world, there are these people who will be like, oh, I'm trying to raise 20 grand for my new studio, and they're telling their audience with this Kickstarter, oh, it's all about the server space. Like, we grew, and then we needed a bigger server, and then we grew, and then we needed a bigger server. And I'm just like, where are you getting this bullshit? Because I went to Bluehost. I originally went to GoDaddy, but then when GoDaddy was supporting CISPA, I actually switched to Bluehost, and I got a typical website. I have a typical amount of space. I upload the show right to my website, and the RSS feed catches it from there. And I've never ever had a problem with that. Never had. I got I would say quite a few listeners, and I've never had the site really go down. I don't know. I think a lot of people make it harder than it needs to be sometimes. Yeah, I don't know. I do it pretty much like anyone would have a website, and I can't think of. Originally I did use a company called Libsyn, which is similar to Podbean, and the Libsyn website that you could use was so limited. I was like, no one is ever going to listen to me. I'm not going to be number one with this shitty website. There's no way. So then I learned how to make websites, made one that is at least decent. It's at least an 8 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10. And that's so key. To be a podcaster, you have to wear so many hats. And there's one show I really love is called Red Bar Radio. It's a really offensive comedy show. People would probably think less of me just knowing that I listened to it if they gave it a shot. But I love it, and I really respect the host because he is amazing. All of his images look super clean. All of his transitional bumper musics that he makes are super awesome, and it makes me jealous that it makes me strive for more because I'm like, this is where his bar is. Man, my website sucks by comparison. Yada yada. So I don't know. Take a show you really admire that's in that number one spot, and compare every aspect: your marketing, your logo, your name, your website, your bumper music, your theme song, all these things. Weigh them directly against the show you think is the best, and watch how quick you feel like a piece of shit. But then again, it's about making progress towards that, not perfection on day one.
Well, that was something that always, when we started, it was like we said, it was just me and Dennis is the first to accept the fact that he is technologically challenged.
I will also accept the fact that Dennis is technologically challenged.
I gotta say, I don't even know you, man. You can fix that. If this is something you want, fix it.
I'm actually glad that he doesn't try to change it because it leads to a
Hilarity.
good source.
Hilarity.
Yeah, it's a good source of material for us.
Hilarity ensues when I done. Again,
So-
I do have a certain specific set of skills that I have, but it's not always technologically based.
It's never technologically based, Dennis. Never.
There's that too.
So I kind of took on the responsibility of trying to figure out RSS feeds, which are still a little confusing when you're just researching RSS feeds. I found it was much easier. I found Podbean, which is their website's limited.
Yep.
The page that we have for Podbean, there's only so much you can do, so
Right.
you have to branch out beyond that. But I found it was much easier to just go ahead and pay that year subscription fee to have them host, so I didn't have to work that much harder to figure out how to make an RSS feed because I'm proficient on the computer, but I'm not a whiz by any means. I don't even know how to begin to start an RSS feed. So for us, it was starting out Dennis being completely incapable and me being almost incapable. So we just went straight with Podbean and we stayed with Podbean because it was easy.
That's a classic problem.
But we have expanded to have the websites. We do want to start. Well, I want to start a T-shirt line. Limited funds is also a problem. When you started your T-shirt lines, did you print them out ahead of time, or did you do like a print on demand?
No, I think print on demand is not necessarily where it's at. I went through a lot of problems with the T-shirt line, and I wasted thousands of dollars. Because I am kind of a control freak, I guess a little bit, at least in the sense, maybe I got this wild hair about control. I'm pretty lazy, but I got this wild hair about I need to know how to make my own website. I need to know how to make my own RSS feed. I'm the host of the show. I need to prep the guests. I need to do everything myself. And so I'm like, I need to do the T-shirts myself. So I bought all the equipment to have a screen printing company. I went to classes. I went up to LA for like 3-day classes with this company. I went to the same class twice because I have a bad memory and I take bad notes. And it was miserable because that is a really, really hard thing to do, and it isn't what I necessarily wanted to do. I just thought I could do it better than the people I was hiring, and I was wrong. It's super tough. But I think the best way to go with T-shirts is to find a local printer that you can work with and you can trust that's putting out a quality product, and then you're in business. But when I worked at GameStop, and San Diego's an expensive city, and GameStop, you don't make much. I would make like, as a store manager, my checks were like 1,100, and you get paid twice a month, so I'm getting 2,200 a month. Well, my rent here, at least my portion of it, is $800. So the first check of the month is rent and just enough to get by to the next 2 weeks. And then that second check I would get, I would take $800 and I would buy T-shirts. I'd buy 100, print me off. They'd be like $8 a piece. I'd order 100 shirts. Boom. Now I got a box in my house and I sell from there. Yeah, you definitely gonna be broke. You're gonna have to put some money into it. It's just how bad do you want it? What do you want it to be? I wanted it to be my career, so I fucking took it seriously and I worked my ass off to get there in not that long a time. When you start a business, before the internet, if you started a business, you had to buy a brick and mortar store. You had to basically have $200,000 just to even have a business. This
Right.
is the wild, wild west. You don't have to do that anymore. Now, instead of a brick and mortar store or paying a high dollar for foot traffic, you have infinite foot traffic. All you got to do is be good. Just do your absolute best, because there's a lot of people putting out mediocre content. There's a lot of people putting out mediocre content, and use that to your advantage.
Yeah, that's one of the inspirations that I had when we sat down to do this show. Was I I will listen to just about any show once, especially if they have an interesting name or they have an interesting premise. I will listen to their show at least once.
Yeah.
Shows that have stuck with me are shows like The Crab Feast, your show, which surprises me, that your show has stuck with me, and that's not, no offense to be meant.
None taken.
I don't really play into the whole conspiracy world. I don't believe a lot of it, and I don't. I'm skeptical of the rest of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So listening to your show, it's like I find myself shaking my head sometimes, like, what the fuck? What the fuck are they talking about? But that's what brings me back the next week, is because I want to hear more.
Mm-hmm.
The Crab Feast, your show, What the Fuck with Mark Maron.
Yeah.
Those are the three, Grimerica I listen to every once in a while. But I've listened to a lot of shows where it's just like, who gave these people a microphone?
Right.
And why are they continuing to have that microphone in front of them? So I started.
The best example of that one, Travis, is the one we listened to about the painting of miniatures.
Yes, there was a dedicated podcast to the painting of Warhammer 40K miniatures.
Wow. The only thing worse than watching paint dry is listening to it.
Exactly. I was like, I listened to an entire episode, and it was torturous because that's what they talked about. They talked about the paint schemes that they used, the various paint colors that they used, and then they would, to have interludes from that thrilling content, they would have battle reports from the tabletop games that they had just played with specific sets of their miniatures. Which I'm a Warhammer fan, but I cannot listen to that. I can't, and I don't know how anybody can.
Apparently someone can if they're continuing to put it out. Why you got to put the guy on blast just because he's doing what he wants?
That's a good point. That's a good point. Have you ever heard of Nerd Poker?
I think I've heard the name.
Nerd Poker is it's a show. I'll be honest, I've never listened to it, but I think it sounds awesome. Brian Posehn is a pretty damn good comic, and it is him and his buddies playing D&D. And I think that's amazing because I had the idea for a D&D podcast because that is something like, think about those old radio plays, The Shadow and shit like that. They're interesting, and people like that stuff. Like Welcome to Night Vale is out there, and I think
That was another one.
a really well done D&D podcast would be so sick. And I'm pretty sure Brian Posehn does a good job.
That's probably what I've heard. I'm a fan of Brian Posehn.
Yeah.
There is a show called Crit Juice that I listen to every once in a while, and it's D&D, but with they're all comedians.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they're not well-known comedians. So they bring on a guest, and then they play D&D. They all get drunk. They have very specific catchphrases that they use. And it's an entertaining show, but I'm gonna have to look up Nerd Poker because I like Brian Posehn. I think the guy's hilarious. Even when he's not being funny, he's hilarious.
Yeah, he's good. What about you other guys? What do you like to listen to?
I listen to the Bigfoot Show.
Right on.
Right now I'm listening to a lot of Bill Burr, his Monday Morning.
Oh, God, he's great. I like Rogan and Duncan Trussell. I like their shows. Rogan's on my dream guest list. I've had Duncan on. That was good.
I think I listened to the first half of the Duncan episode on my way to work one day. I would like to talk to Joe Rogan for a probably completely different reason than you, but I want to talk to Joe Rogan just about how difficult is it to continue, like, daily he stirs shit up. Like, how stressful is that for you to just piss people off on a daily basis?
I doubt it's very stressful at all, man. I mean, I definitely piss people off with some of the content we talk about, but when you're in your bubble and you have more fans than haters, it doesn't matter. So Joe Rogan, he really can't say much that's going to offend his core base. So I don't think he cares. He's got 10 million in the bank, an amazing podcast with more listeners than any other show. I think that if anything, he has the least stressful life of anyone I can imagine.
I'd
That's
want to know
probably
what it
true.
was like hanging out with Phil Hartman all the time.
Yeah.
That's the only question I'd have for him would be about news radio.
Was he on news radio?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. I guess
Where
that's
he
old.
got started.
I'm old.
I don't remember him being on news radio.
Yeah, he was the electrician.
Yeah.
You know, there's another one I listened to is Stefan Molyneux, Free Domain Radio.
Yes. Stefan has put out some amazing content. Like, he has one YouTube video that was so inspirational to me. It's called The History of Your Enslavement, I think. Fascinating video. But I disagree with him on a couple of things, and that's why people ask me to have him on all the time. And the problem is he is one of these guys that I think I would get into a debate with, and that's not the kind of show that I have. And he's a professional debater. You know, that's what he does. He debated Peter Joseph about the exact philosophical difference that I have with him, and I don't think that I'm at that level. And I think if I'm going to interview someone, it should be complimentary, not confrontational. I've had one interview that went super south, but I'm not looking to do that again.
Yeah, I listened to that one.
But he can be awesome, and I think in the end I agree more with Stefan Montague than the average person. So
Yeah, I'm on a bigger agreement with a lot of his stuff sometimes. I mean, like I said, I'm not always in agreement with him, but I don't think I'm not. I also don't follow blindly. So,
Yeah.
but I do agree with a lot of things he says.
I just don't think the free market is the answer to everything. I think the free market, in a lot of ways, doesn't solve the problems of cutthroat corporations clawing their way to the top. I think that the corporations that are at the top now are awful. I mean, they're completely immoral. They're polluting the planet, polluting the people, using slave labor, paying less than as little as they possibly can. I don't think the answer to all of our problems is just giving them free reign. But, you know, we don't have to get into that whole argument. But that's his answer to every problem is like, oh, just if you gave it to the free market, then things would be happening. If you deregulate it, everything would be fine. I don't think the state's the answer either, but either way.
Well, we've had
Discussions on that.
many discussions because Dennis and I are both self-proclaimed libertarians. Craig is Mr. America. His lower third ID bar disappeared again, but he we do hold to a free market concept where a free market does answer a lot of problems, but it doesn't answer every problem.
Right.
So to go with your answer being, well, just let the free market take care of it, well, that's not going to solve everything because you still have to take into consideration that it's involving human beings, and human beings suck. And they're a terrible breed, and they're a disease on this planet, and they're looking to get whatever they can get from somebody else. So a free market will not stop a corporate entity from coming in and looking grassroots, because we've already seen that. We've already seen massive corporate entities come in and be grassroots. The truth commercials, when they first started, you didn't know that those were by Philip Morris. It wasn't until the lawsuit that came after the lawsuit that made them do the truth commercials, made them also announce that it was by Philip Morris. So you have an organization that spreads disease and addiction, one that I struggle with. Just recently conquered smoking cigarettes, and well, don't congratulate me yet. I'm on shaky ground. So
Move it over to pipes. I mean, you don't inhale anymore. You just kind of puff away.
Travis, I was watching the Mega 64 podcast, and as Derek pointed out, once you smoke a cigarette, you are always a smoker. Just you're trying not to the rest of your life.
Yeah, that's pretty much my new reality, is especially Like I said, I work in a factory, and almost everybody I work with smokes. So I will be jonesing so bad, and I made a promise to my wife 2 years ago now when she got pregnant. I told her that I would quit smoking, and that didn't work. So I said the day you give birth will be the last day that I smoke, and that worked for about 2.5 months. And then my son is now
7.
no, he's
15.
What is it? He's 14 months, and I've just now quit smoking for several days in a row. But there is that idea that, you know, politically you can't have one answer. Libertarian is not the answer. Republican is not the answer. Democrat is not the answer. In and of itself, no, it's not, Craig. You have to have you talked about it as far as the podcast. You always have to have forward progression. If libertarianism brings us to a smaller government, a smoother life, a smoother what's the
I have no clue.
what's the words I'm looking for? I can't think of the words now. If our comfortability could get better,
I don't think
if
that's
people who
Comfortability? I don't
if
know.
if people who work day in day out just to barely scrape by could be more comfortable in comfortability is a word. So fuck you guys.
But libertarians want to
It's
get
a
rid of the
word.
minimum wage. So how does that make people who are poor better off?
The minimum wage problem is. Say that again, Craig. I
You
didn't
don't
hear
think
you.
McDonald's would charge people 50 cents an hour if they were legally allowed to?
good point.
Everybody would have a job, but everybody would be as poor as some fucks in India. You know, we would be screwed. Corporations hate people. They love money and they eat people to get it.
That's
So I think that's a huge problem with libertarianism.
Because the private police force ain't going to do shit for you. Because you can't afford it.
I didn't say libertarian was the answer. I said libertarian has a lot of answers.
Yeah, but if you elect a libertarian government, what they will do is get rid of the minimum wage. So either you support that or you
that's
kinda
where
don't.
that's where the free market comes in and tries to repair that. Because with the minimum wage removal, and that's a step, several steps down the line, as far as every libertarian manifesto I've ever read, the equalization or the everybody's got a manifesto. Republicans have a manifesto.
How do you keep McDonald's from charging 50 cents an hour or paying their employees 50 cents an hour or any corporation?
You destroy the ability to have a corporation. And that's where it starts grassroots. The government can't really do that until they repeal the I forget which law it is that has the
The Constitution.
wording.
No, we're not repealing that.
No, until they repeal the law that has the wording that corporations are considered people. And as soon as you can get rid of, I don't remember which law that is. I was just reading it a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, obviously that has to go.
And when you can get rid of that, and that shakes the foundation of corporate America or global corporations, now you can say, well, we don't need a minimum wage because now these corporations who are looking just to suck the life out of everybody can't. Because now unions can step back in, guilds can step back in, and these people who used to have power and used to protect the people who worked.
Yeah, because the libertarian.
I think Paul would burn you at the stake for talking about unions, man. Peter Montague, too. Those guys do not believe in unions.
Well, they don't need to. You don't like because, like I said, not every single ideology is the answer. It's going to
That's
take a
true.
blend of everything.
That's why I
So
don't
if
define myself by an ideology. You know, I think everybody should find their individual ism.
that is actually perfect. Uh, I use libertarian because that's the as close as it gets that people can understand.
Fair.
I have taken bits from communism. I spent some time on the extreme right side of politics, which taught me quite a bit about how not to be. Uh, and then libertarianism has enough flexibility that I can take various good points from other political ideologies and political philosophies and put them all together. So my political philosophy doesn't fit Dennis's, and obviously, you know, Mr. America with 2x4 doesn't fit at all. But no, it's interesting, and I actually I'm glad to a certain extent. I'm glad that we moved away from the political side in our podcast because that does tend to polarize people. As Craig puts a giant flag in front of his computer screen. It does polarize people, and that's most of the podcasts I listen to. They're palatable, so it doesn't. They're not too polarizing for like even me with your show where I disagree or where I'm skeptical about a lot of the topics. It's not presented in a way that says, this is absolute fact and fuck you if you don't believe it.
Yeah, we just did a show that the moon might be a hologram. It's hard not to be skeptical.
Yeah, I listen. I actually I found that one made me think for a couple of days. I was like, are there people that actually believe that we're looking at a hologram? Like
Did you
there's
watch the lunar wave footage?
I did.
It's interesting.
It is interesting, although I'm thinking that it's probably explainable outside of we're looking at a construct.
Maybe.
Don't ask me how it's explainable. I have a few ideas, but I have a hard time believing that anybody on this planet has the ability to build a construct big enough to hide the moon. Even if it was just a temporary construct, I have a hard time believing that anybody on this planet is that far,
Me too.
or any government has that much power. It is an interesting thought to think, well, what if they are hiding it? What if one day, they flew a giant screen around the world, and now we're living in a dome, much like
Truman
Truman.
Show. Yeah, and some people
And
think the whole reality is an illusion, is a hologram. So perhaps the moon is just like, if all our reality is a hologram, the moon is just like nothing,
Well,
nuts and
yeah,
potatoes.
I mean, in all honesty, philosophically speaking, everything we see is just perception. I mean,
It's true.
everybody's perception is completely different. So technically, yes, everything could be an illusion because the way I see things is not exactly the way you see things. Just the way the world works. I mean,
What if you
and
die and you wake up with a bunch of grays standing around you and a bong in your hand, and they're like, "Did it work?" Yeah, man, it did work. I felt like I lived a whole life. I had a podcast.
there is
My question is, from what you two were talking about, because I really don't know what you're talking about. Is this like you guys are talking about someone getting ready to David Copperfield the moon, where they put the sheet up and then
No.
the moon's not there, but it's actually on the other side, and
No, we're talking about the moon that you see in the night sky might be a projection of some type. It all stems from the lunar wave footage, which is something that my guest Crow had uncovered or discovered, and then other people started finding it also and finding it in footage. But what it is if you look at the moon in these high def this footage they've captured, hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, and it happens like once or twice. But it looks like the tracking on a VCR on an old tape. Like it looks like it wipes down the moon, and it's like a ripple or like an energy pulse of some kind, I guess would be a way to describe it. It's very interesting footage. You could say it was atmospheric. You could say it was I really don't know. Holographic or atmospheric, I think, are the only real answers. But it's compelling footage because you would think if it was a problem with the camera, this tracking bar would go across the entire screen, but it doesn't. It only goes across the moon. It doesn't cross into the empty space around the moon. So it's some type of pulse on the moon. This guy believes that it might be a glitch in the moon hologram. We hear a lot of whistleblowers saying there are moon bases. If there were moon bases, they're either on the far side or you have to put something up to block the view. It gets pretty far out there. This is not Conspiracy 101. This is the deepest steps of the dark rabbit hole we're going into. Not necessarily a place to start.
It's a little far-reaching, and me being the eternal skeptic, I think I enjoy your show the most just because I like arguing with your show as it's playing.
Fair.
I think there's I read a book trying to understand my wife a little bit. I've read 2 books because she believes things that are completely impossible to me. She believes in existence after death. She believes in ghosts. And she believes a few other things that I can't even that I won't attempt to explain because I usually get it wrong according to her. But I read The Holographic Universe.
Give it a try.
And a book called Life Between Life, both to try and understand the concept that she believes. And in The Holographic Universe, he talks about that book is disproved completely by the author himself because he talks about how people can cure cancer by will alone, and then he died of stomach cancer.
Right.
So, like, his book is disproved to me based on that alone, but he does touch on the topic that reality is a hologram, that what we see is not real. Like, the things, they're real, but it's not real. We're not physically, when we shake each other's hands, we're not physically touching each other.
That's true.
When we speak to each other, we're not physically speaking. We're not vocalizing anything. The construct of the universe is a hologram, and it's all basically a giant computer program that we run our life. The course of our life is a specific part of that program, and when that program finishes, it terminates. So it's an interesting concept to reach beyond even that, because that's extreme to me, but to reach beyond that and say, well, things that we're looking at are actually holograms.
Yeah, it's trippy. I had a guest once who talked all about that, and the way he put it, and it's just philosophical, but he said, do you believe that seeing what you see in the world, there'll ever be a time where man can create a virtual reality that is indistinguishable from reality? I said, well, yeah, I think that in an infinite universe, in an infinite timeline, if we don't kill ourselves first, yeah, there's definitely a chance I think we'll achieve that. And he said, well, in an infinite timeline, isn't it more likely that we've achieved that already than we haven't? Like, you're in it. And I thought that was kind of interesting. If it's possible that it can be indistinguishable from reality, how do you know you're not in it? How do you know you didn't put in a quarter and it says, okay, the first thing that we start this thing off with is you can't know you're playing a game or it ruins the whole thing. So here's your start. And then eventually you get a game over, and then you're like, damn, that was such a sick game. I really felt like I was living that life. I felt like I was on that Oatmeal Conspiracy podcast, and it all felt so real.
Bug, Greg, I know you have some things you got to go get onto. I bungled that transition.
That's usually in our flawless spirit right there.
Yeah, that's a flawless transition. But speaking of real, Greg, it has been a really good time to talk to you. I hope that we didn't, or that I didn't.
I can see that.
There's our 2-minute warning.
Yeah, my name's Sam, and I don't give a fuck.
I hope that I didn't bungle it too much, as I normally do. And anytime you want to come back, we'd be more than happy to have you. And best of luck to your show, man. I'm going to keep listening, I know that much.
And yours. I think the group dynamic is fun. It's definitely a far cry from what I do, being the singular man behind the mic and doing all the post-production and all that stuff. This is definitely the opposite end of the spectrum. I think it's fun to do. I like seeing the video. I just don't, whenever I hook my webcam up, it always interferes with my high-end audio equipment, and I just can't get it to not do that. So all I can do is disable it. But it is fun. This is a good show.
Right up. Tell your listeners to come say hi.
For sure. Whenever this goes up, send me a link. I'll tweet it out there.
Monday evening.
For sure.
Very consistent about that. Every Monday, 7 o'clock is usually our show is posted.
Solid.
So that'd be time zones. I'm terrible with time zones.
Yeah, Monday 7 Central Time, so it's 7, 8.
That'd be 5 Pacific. I used to live in the Central, so I'm very, very used to doing that math.
That math has messed me up more than once.
You lived in 3 different time zones, that's why.
Yes, well, yeah, that's true. But Greg, once again,
so mention Vampire Weekend real quick.
I love Vampire Weekend. Who gives a fuck about an Oxford coma?
That is totally the name of this episode, and that's how I get people to come by and listen, even though they don't want to.
Greg, it has been a blast. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Good luck to you. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
All right, you too. And thanks for listening, Hank.